What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another video. So today I want to talk about why you shouldn't have two protagonists. So something that I see a lot in my YouTube comments, in the clients that I've worked with, and in the scripts that I've read, I see a lot of the times, both in pilots and in features, people are trying to write with two protagonists, okay? And this ends up confusing them a lot and making their story more difficult than it probably needs to be. So when we're thinking about a protagonist, okay, this is something that can get confusing in defining exactly what a protagonist is, okay? So one of the things that you have likely heard me talk about is that the protagonist is what I call the driving force in your story, okay? So they are the sun in your solar system. They are the engine of the car. They are the thing that is pushing the story forward, right? Now, this may not be in the very beginning, right? So you might have the very beginning of where they're at, then you have some sort of inciting incident, and then from there, they are essentially pushing the story forward as a whole, right? And so this flow, right, thinking about your protagonist as the driving force of your story, right, that isn't on accident, okay? That's an important element of what a leading character is doing. And so when we say that we have two protagonists, what we're saying is we're having another guy standing here, another character standing here, also pushing something forward, and maybe they have their own thing. But this immediately creates this confusion, right? Because, okay, are these two entities, are they pushing two separate stories forward in parallel? Or are they somehow on the same trajectory and kind of controlling that trajectory? And what does that look like? Does that mean they're allies? Does that mean they're against each other? What are we actually talking about when we're saying two driving force characters? But this isn't how you are thinking about it, right? You are just thinking, if you are making this mistake, you're not thinking about it this way. All you're thinking about is that you have two main characters, and you're saying that both of them are main characters. And so you are confusing the idea of a main character with the idea of a protagonist, right? So you can have all sorts of main characters, right? I mean, your story can be full of main characters. Your antagonists are main characters. Your side characters for the hero are main characters, right? But there really usually is only one protagonist. Now, of course, there can be multiple. Yes, you can write a story with two protagonists, but it's just going to confuse you, and most of the time it makes for a more frustrating story, and it makes it harder to actually get that story working. A good example of this is Batman v Superman. When you have two characters that are supposed to be driving the story forward, you create this weird sort of confusion in regards to who is actually leading the story, and this creates complications. So if we're trying to plot this on a story circle, what happens is you have your driving character at the one, they want something. Again, we have our unfamiliar situation, adapt, get, pay, return, and change. So if you have that protagonist here, and then they are leading the story up to this point, and then something else is supposed to change, and then now you have like the second protagonist take over, and they're supposed to bring us to here, but how does that make any sense? Because this character is the only one that has the want that then is going to fulfill the get through the want here, and then suddenly you have a mess, right? Like, it just doesn't make actual sense to have two protagonists. You can have as many main characters as you want, but don't conflate the two. Okay, so if you are thinking that you have two protagonists and we need to change this, what do we do instead? What really is this other character that we think is our secondary protagonist? Well, it's going to be extremely simple in a way that might be frustrating to some of you. That character is likely your antagonist, right? Okay, so even if you have a story that isn't your two protagonists are, even if they are not directly opposing each other in some sort of external conflict, well, then you're already messing up. But it doesn't have to be them at war, is what I mean, for them to be the antagonist of the story, right? What's likely happened is that you have confused who is leading the story and who is the character challenging the lead to the story, right? So rather than saying that you have two protagonists, it makes it a lot clearer to say, okay, this is the character that is the driving character. Okay, my protagonist is the story driving character. They are who I'm putting at the one when I'm plotting story circles. They are going to be the one with the want. They're encountering the unfamiliar situation, adapting to it, getting what they want, paying, returning, and changing. The antagonist then can come into this in a more clear way and say, okay, well, maybe the antagonist is what creates that 3 for our protagonist. And maybe as the protagonist reacts against what happens in that 3 and the adapt and ultimately gets what they want at 5, maybe the antagonist reappears at the 6 to create the pay, and ultimately in the climax that will happen in the 7 of the story here as well, right? So when you think about it this way, then you can say, okay, clearly this one character is the driver of my story's plot, and now I can take these other main characters, whether they are antagonists outright or whether they are side characters that support the protagonist. Now you can start to make actual definitions about who is driving my story forward and who is a secondary character or who is the antagonist. Okay, so what also happens a lot of the times is we see this in TV shows where I'll read somebody's pilot, and again, they have so many characters that they're trying to introduce to the audience that they aren't sure who their protagonist is, right? Or if they have chosen a protagonist, they don't allow that protagonist to actually go through a momentum circle, that is the story circle. They simply introduce the protagonist to us and then also have these other characters essentially taking action at the same level and of importance as the protagonist. And then what happens when you do this is you create this super disjointed story. So we meet a character and they kind of do something, and then we go to another character to meet them and they kind of do something, and then we come back to this other character and we're not sure how what we just watched is impacting this, and now we just kind of have a confusing mess, right? But if you look at some successful dramas that were TV shows that have a lot of different characters involved in them, most of the time there is one central protagonist that you can say, this is the number one protagonist that the entire story is building around. And even when you have other characters going through their own story circles and taking action within the confines of that story, it's still happening under the umbrella of the protagonist's journey, that driving character's journey, right? And so this is not restrictive, right? What this actually allows you to do is understand what is supposed to be happening in your story to create that cause and effect flow and to create more interesting and more impactful character arcs and character journeys rather than having something that feels more disjointed. If you look at something like Peaky Blinders, that I've mentioned multiple times before, Thomas Shelby is the protagonist. The other characters operate around him. Same in Breaking Bad. Walter White is the protagonist. All of these characters do other things and act and do X, Y, and Z, but there is one clear protagonist. So whether you are working on a feature and you feel like you have two protagonists, or whether you are working on a TV series and you're trying to figure out how this pilot should work and you feel like you have two protagonists, pick one, right? Even in buddy stories, right? Even in a film that's kind of like a buddy cop type story, these kinds of things. One of two things is happening there. One, you have one character as the protagonist and another character is essentially the side character helping them along, or you have a situation where they almost are one entity in the sense that they are together for so much of the story and they are driving the story in such a unified way that they are essentially inseparable and operate structurally as one character, right? But ultimately, all of this is overly confusing, right? And what's happening here is you are taking a definition like protagonist, and then you are trying to reinvent how a story works based upon the arbitrary definition that we gave to this, right? So what I mean by this is you're taking this idea of like, okay, protagonist, main story character. That's how you're defining it. And you're saying, okay, what if we have two main story characters? It's like, okay, well, now we're getting off track of how you really should be defining protagonist, which is story driver, who's in the driver's seat of this story, right? And sometimes you'll enter into a situation where you can pick who your story's protagonist is, not by which character you would prefer it be, but which character is actually driving the story forward, right? And why does it matter if we pick a character to drive the story forward? Because without having that story drive, then we can't actually have character arc. Because then without a drive, we have no goal. And without a goal, we have no reason to be watching this at all, unless we're making a complete anti-plot film. And that's, again, something else entirely. So hopefully that makes some sense to you. Don't get overly confused and don't allow yourself to want to reinvent the wheel on this stuff when you haven't nailed the basic flow yet, right? Like you're trying to integrate this sort of two main character idea before you've mastered a character arc at all, or before you've mastered story flow or story structure or any of these basic elements. And these things take time to get right. And so pick one character to be the driver of your story, and you will be surprised at how much clearer that makes the flow of your story and how much more helpful that can be for you as you are trying to figure out what to do with this big old mess of a feature sitting in front of you. So I hope that's helpful to you. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one to find and fix all the problems in your particular screenplay, there is a link below this video where you can hop on and book a call with me and we can have a conversation about working together. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.